So you have a judgment against a party. Maybe it's a company or an individual. You won your lawsuit. Congratulations. Now you have a judgment. So the question is, what do you do next to collect the money? The first question people ask is, should I do an asset search? And we're going to talk about the pros and cons and the reasons you want to consider whether or not you should run an asset search after you get a judgment in order to collect your recovery. Many times clients are wary about running an asset search because you don't want to throw good money after bad. You don't want to spend the money. You're also worried about, is it going to be done properly to get accurate information, but also done properly where it's not illegal and you're not going to get into trouble. So we'll talk about all these things here on our channel. Remember, we are licensed private investigators. As an agency, we specialize in asset searching, fraud investigations. So this is an area that we do quite a bit of work in. And an asset search is a process of looking for records which will show what is owned by the subject debtor or the defendant. It could be assets such as real estate, vehicles, corporate assets, and here's the big one I bet you're thinking of, bank accounts. Can you search for bank accounts? Well, here are the pros and cons of running an asset search, especially after you get a judgment. If you run an asset search, you will get a snapshot of what assets are held by that debtor at the time of the judgment. So if a year or 2 or 3 years later, you find that the debtor has squandered assets or transferred assets or improperly disposed of assets, putting them in somebody else's name, for example, you now have a snapshot showing what they had at the time of the judgment or shortly after. So you can prove, look, they had this $1 million house. Now they don't. Let's find out where that asset went. They had this much money in the bank. Now it's all gone. Let's find out if it was transferred fraudulently, right? So that's the pro number one, is you want to get a snapshot of where they're at to lock that in place, because 2 or 3 years from now, you can't go back in time and run an asset search historically. You can a little bit, but the records aren't going to be as accurate as they are in the moment. So what is a disadvantage of running an asset search? Well, the first one is the cost. You have won your judgment probably because somebody took money from you. Maybe it was a fraud scheme, a scam. Maybe it was a contract that went bad, which means you have a loss. That's what your judgment is for, is to pay back money you lost. Now, to run an asset search, you have to put more money in. So maybe you don't want to lose more money. Maybe you don't want to put more money out of your pocket. Maybe you don't have any money, right? All the money was stolen or taken by this defendant. So the downside is now you have to put money in to the process to get an asset search done. We'll talk about a couple ways to maybe offset part of that. One is you could do the asset search yourself. An asset search is simply a research project. The hard cost of money out of pocket is not that much. The biggest cost is the labor, the time. Most asset searches take 20 to 24 hours of work to do the research, compile the records. There may be a few $100s in actual cost to get records, to buy copies of deeds, or to get corporate records. And those costs are government fees to get official records. So the actual money out of pocket is not that big a deal. It's just the time. So if you're willing to put in the time, you can actually do the asset search yourself. Don't have the huge out-of-pocket expense. You're just putting time into it. And our website, Active Intel, will show you how to do it. You're also able now to book a consultation with a licensed investigator that can explain to you a little bit more one-on-one how the asset search process works. What's another advantage? Let's go back to the pro column of doing an asset search. Number one, you will know if in that moment it's worth chasing the debtor. So if they don't have any assets right now, maybe their bank accounts are empty, they have no real estate, you know now's the time to step back a little bit. Put that judgment on hold, file it away, maybe come back in a few years and see, do they have assets now? It will tell you where you stand with that judgment, and is it even worth trying to do garnishment or collection? So that's an advantage. It'll paint the picture. You won't be operating in the dark about doing the the recovery collection effort. Let's go back to the con list, disadvantages. You have to be very careful when you're doing an asset search not to run afoul of the law. There are many federal laws which prohibit certain types of activities in finding assets. The most important law is the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, GLB. So if you're doing an asset search or you're paying somebody to do an asset search, make sure it's done using GLB compliant methods, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act compliant, because many of the methods that you could use to get information are illegal. Sometimes even investigators don't know what's legal or not legal. If you're not doing asset searches every day, you may not be aware of the most current laws. For example, if you pick up a phone and you call up a bank and say, hey, Chase Bank, this is John Smith. My social security number is this. Tell me how much I have in the bank. This is you calling to pretend you are John Smith. If you do that, you're breaking the law. You're actually doing identity theft. You're pretending you're somebody else. That's obvious. But here's another trick that used to be more common, and some investigators still do this, not knowing it's illegal. Your video will be back in 8 seconds. In the meantime, remember, you have access to live one-on-one consultation, undivided attention of a licensed certified expert in this subject and many others. We want to listen to your story. We want to hear your questions and give you expert advisement of your options. We want to tell you what we know about your situation and what options you have. Now back to your video. Let's say you want to find out somebody's bank account. Well, what you do is you make up a fake rebate check that looks official. It's got a logo on it, company name, and you mail it to the debtor and say, hey, thank you for purchasing your product from us. Thanks for buying American. We appreciate your business. Here's a showing of our appreciation. Here's a check for $5. Here's a check for $10. And you mail it to that debtor. And when you use something like patriotic, like thanks for buying American, you put an American flag in the logo. And so they're going to say, hey, I got $10 for free. And then what do? They go cash it at their bank, or they deposit it at their bank. Either way, it's going to stamp on the back of that check what bank it was cashed at. So now you get that check back and you say, oh, now I know they have an account at, TD Bank, wherever it is. And it might seem like, well, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't, do identity theft, but you did. Because the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act says that you cannot make any misrepresentation in order to get private information. Well, banking information is considered private. That was a misrepresentation. It's a violation. And we've had many cases where we have seen for our clients where if they're involved in a lawsuit, we tell them, keep your eyes open for any unusual activity. Mail, phone calls, text messages, anything, let us know. And we've seen some of these techniques and we've pointed them out, and the other side has been admonished, sometimes prosecuted or regulated for doing these things. So you have to make sure you're doing it properly, whether you do it or somebody else does it, that it's GLB compliant. Let's go back to the pro side, the advantage side. If you do find an asset, let's say you find a bank account and it's got $800,000 in it, you can immediately go to a writ of garnishment. You can start garnishing the asset immediately. It's a process by filing some documents to get permission to take that money, and you can walk right into the bank with that garnishment, slap it on the counter, and they have to write you a check from that person's account without telling them. Now, remember, in all this, we're not attorneys. We're not giving you legal advice. This is just some observations of what we see attorneys do and what we see in cases. So you want to make sure you get good legal advice as you're working on these things. So that's an advantage. You find an asset, boom, you can go seize that asset immediately. The last one on the disadvantage con side is the accuracy of these reports. Look, the term asset search doesn't have any official definition. It means whatever somebody says it is. There are some companies or some people that advertise on Craigslist or on social media that says, I'll do an asset search for $50. All they're doing is they're running a Google search on the person's name to see what pops up on Google. That's not an asset search. Or maybe they're running a database LexisNexis type search that shows a few things. That's not an asset search. A true asset search is when an investigator actually pulls official records. You go to the recorder of deeds. You go to the DMV to get car titles. You go to do OSINT records for banking information. You go to Secretary of State for corporate records. You go to USPTO for intellectual property. There are places that are official, and I say that really important, official records for every type of asset, not just a Google search or some random third-party database. So beware, not all asset searches are equal. And if you're buying one, make sure that the source is not only qualified to do it, but also licensed, because technically in almost every state, in order to run an asset search for a third party, you have to be a licensed private investigative agency. And if that person, company, whoever it is, does not have the proper license, if you get that report, you get that information, even if it's right, and you use it in court, you use it to garnish assets, if the other side finds out that you did not use a licensed investigator and they did it kind of like gray area, black market kind of thing, they can have it excluded and maybe even have sanctions against you for violating their privacy. And of course, somebody who's not licensed is probably more likely to use improper techniques. So that's another con, making sure that you check out the source of your asset search to make sure they're licensed, make sure that even if they are licensed, that they are experienced in doing these things, not finding out how to do it on the fly. We're a member of a lot of private investigator local trade associations, and there's a couple of them that have an email chat board where you can email back and forth, hey, I got a question about this or that, between investigators. It's a private board. And we see investigators who are licensed that ask the most basic questions. How do I run an asset search? How do I get this information about employment? Where do I find this record? These are things that are common knowledge. And what it tells me is that that person has a client, a customer that wants to buy something, which they don't know how to do, and they're just asking some random board how to do it. Who knows if the answer they get is right or even legal? So make sure you're getting a good source for doing it, and shop around. Make sure you get the right price and you're not paying too much money for doing your asset search. Hopefully that gives you an example of what's possible with asset searches. The important thing is making the right decision whether or not you should run an asset search. And sometimes it's a judgment call. Like, do you want to spend the money? Do you care about it? Do you want to try to collect your judgment right now or maybe wait a while? But certainly you have that option, and our website will give you more information on making the right decision. And of course, as always, you could do a consultation with one of our investigators, myself, to get a little more guidance on what your next move might be. Appreciate you watching. See you in the next video. If you like this video, be sure to click on a few others on our channel to see if there's other information that might be helpful to you about this same subject, or maybe even other related subjects that could assist you with your resolution of your issue.